and welcome to another highlights tour of my latest TikTok live tour. Now this tour is entitled Smithfield, London's Bloodiest Square, and I think you're going to enjoy it. So what you're going to see on this tour is it's a lot darker than the previous tour. So I'm going to introduce you to some incredible pubs with wonderful stories behind them, fascinating characters, a lot of historic churches, including the incredible St Bartholomew's Priory. There's Smithfield Square itself, London's Bloodiest Square, a lot of fascinating facts about the area, as well as some film locations which I think you'll enjoy. So before we carry on, a little bit about me. If you haven't met me before, my name is Gary and I am an actor. I am a tour guide and I teach theatre workshops in London and in Italy. I also teach how to be a tour guide to international students, again in London and in Italy. And at the moment there are no tours at present when I'm speaking to you here, live tours with people. So I've discovered TikTok, I've discovered YouTube, and I'm able to show you around areas that I love in London on this. So although you're not physically with me, if you come on one of the live tours, so guys, please follow me on TikTok for more live tours. It will be a very interactive experience. You can ask me questions and chat afterwards about the tour. So there'll be plenty of those coming. But this is the next best thing to showing people around live. What else can I tell you? Not much. Subscribe to this YouTube channel. Try to build it up so I can go live on YouTube as well, and follow me on TikTok. And also, last thing guys, if you are interested in any themed virtual tours of London, I do have those on my website, which you can see below. And while you're taking that in, I'll give you some examples. There's 6 on there. For example, Jack the Ripper online tour, there's a Shakespeare walk, there's a historical pub tour of London where we go into 4 old pubs, Royal Scandals tour, a tour of my local district Enfield, very interesting, and another one of another local area, Waltham Cross and Waltham Abbey, and there'll be more to come. The next one should be Americans in London for you on the other side of the pond. So guys, without further ado, follow me and come into London's Bloodiest Square. So let me give you your bearings just to begin with, show you where we are exactly. If you travel in this direction, you are traveling east towards St Paul's Cathedral and St Paul's Station. Now I advise you, if you're coming to Smithfield, that's the best station to use, because it's only about a 5-minute walk to Smithfield itself. Then if we travel around in this direction is west, and about a 10-minute walk you'll find yourself at Chancery Lane Station, again on the Central Line, just like St Paul's Station. If you go this way, that is south, and about a 10-minute walk you will find yourself at Blackfriars Station and the River Thames. And we are travelling in this direction. We're travelling towards Smithfield, London's Bloodiest Square. But before we do that, I'm going to point out some of the interesting buildings in this area before we move into Smithfield. And we'll start, there you go, look at this bus going through. Classic tour. Okay, we're going to start with that building that the bus is just passing by, and that is the Old Bailey, the Central Criminal Court. So it's known as the Old Bailey because that's the name of the road that it stands on. The present building was opened in 1902, and it was built on the foundations of the notorious Newgate Prison. Let's cross and we'll go a little closer. So Newgate Prison began life in 1188. The present building was opened in 1902 and is built, as I said, on the foundations of Newgate Prison, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. Now, I'm saving the main stories about Newgate Prison for another tour, because yeah, I think it's better at night telling those kind of stories. We'll do a ghost story at some stage. So if you look above, you'll see the golden statue of Lady Justice. Now she has the sword in one hand and the scales in the other hand. But, very unusual for statues of Lady Justice, she is not blindfolded. So most statues of Lady Justice are blindfolded, and it indicates that you receive a fair trial. She is impartial. But this statue, she's not blindfolded. So it's a lot of defendants have remarked that they don't receive a fair trial here at the Old Bailey. Let's go a little closer. So Charles Dickens was a young reporter here, and I'm sure he got a lot of inspiration for some of his novels by listening to some of the cases that were going on here. Now, some of the most famous cases here include Dr. Crippen, the Cray twins in the 1960s, the Yorkshire Ripper, and Ruth Ellis, the last woman to be executed in the UK. Now, while we're on the subject of executions, let's move over to the entrance. There you go, Central Criminal Court. So while we're on the subject of executions, hangings took place outside what was Newgate Prison until 1888, when they were moved inside away from the crowds. And oh boy, did those executions draw huge crowds. You know, remember, it was a form of entertainment. The rich would actually sit outside on balconies of pubs, watching the executions, the hangings, while eating a hearty meal and drinking a glass of wine or gin. And the poor would gather below here. Now, as you can see, this is a pretty wide area, and that was to cater for up to 40,000 people who would be crammed in, eager to see the hangings. Now, on one occasion in 1807, dozens of people died when there was a huge crush as people clamoured to see the execution. Now, if you look in this direction, you can see how narrow the street is at the end. And that just shows you it was this area that was the area for the hangings. Now, you can visit the Old Bailey, and as long as when you visit, you must not have your mobile phone with you. There used to be a cafeteria, coffee shop over on the other side of the street where you could leave your mobile phones, as many people would turn up expecting just to be able to turn their phone off and then go into the court, but it's just not allowed. But it is very interesting if you want to go and have a look at British justice at work. So a couple of other things I would like to show you before we move into Smithfield Square itself. And the first is just the crossing of this street, because this is where Newgate stood until it was demolished in 1777. Now, it was one of the old London city gates, and it was built into the wall which surrounded medieval city of London, but actually had Roman origins. I have another video about another of those gates, Aldgate, on my TikTok tour. So have a look at TikTok, follow me on TikTok, and you'll see lots of fun fact videos. So what we're going to do next, guys, is go over to that pub on the other side of the street, which is the Viaduct Tavern. Historic pub. Here's our first historical pub, the Viaduct Tavern, built in 1869. It's a wonderful pub and was formerly a gin palace. Now, gin palaces are always rather ornate inside with mirrors, many mirrors, and a beautiful etched glass. But the Victorians had another use for these mirrors, because it allowed the bar staff to see if there were any shady dealings going on, particularly prostitution or theft. Now, the bar staff used to allow you to go down into the holding cells here. There are a couple of holding cells where prisoners were held before they were taken to another prison or transported to an execution. Now, when Oscar Wilde was on trial here at the Old Bailey, it is said he would adjourn to the Viaduct Tavern for lunch. Inside, there's a lot of ghost stories attached to the Viaduct Tavern as well, but I will save them for our ghost tour. So let's go back over the street, as I want to tell you about this church. Now, it was originally a Norman church stood here, and it's known as the Church of the Holy Sepulchre without Newgate. Now, when I say without, what do I mean? Basically, you've just seen where Newgate stood, the old gates, Newgate stood, and it meant the church was outside the city walls. So without Newgate meant it was outside of Newgate. So we're now outside the old Roman and medieval city, actually in Holborn Viaduct. So back to the church. It was named the Church of the Holy Sepulchre because it was named after the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. So let me tell you about a link between the church and Newgate Prison. Remember where the Old Bailey stood. Now, inside Newgate Prison there was a corridor known as Dead Man's Walk, which was a series of archways which are still there, and they become increasingly smaller, and it was through these archways that the condemned prisoners were led on their way to the gallows. And inside the church there is a bell, a handbell, that was rung outside the cell of the condemned prisoner on the eve of an executioner. And these words were recited: "All ye that in the condemned cell do lie, prepare ye, for tomorrow you will die. And when the bell of St. Sepulchre tolls, the Lord have mercy on your souls." Now, inside there is a wonderful musician's chapel, and the ashes of Sir Henry Wood are interred there. Now, Sir Henry Wood founded the Proms, which carry on today at the Albert Hall. Take a look at my little TikTok video of the Albert Hall. Now, other notable burials inside include Thomas Culpeper, the lover of Henry VIII's wife, Catherine Howard, which ended with both of their heads on the block. Roger Williams is buried here, and he was the founder of Rhode Island in the United States. And another link to the United States is John Smith, the governor of Virginia, and the man who, legend has it, was rescued by a Native American princess Pocahontas. Now, by the way, Pocahontas did indeed visit England, but as she was leaving to go back to the colonies, she was travelling along the Thames estuary and she sadly died. And she's actually buried in the cemetery of St George's Church in Gravesend. One more thing to show you here. Follow me. Another man buried inside the church is Sam Gurney, MP. Now, he erected this drinking fountain, which was the first metropolitan drinking fountain in London. Now, the cups are still here. There you go. But I'm afraid the fountain doesn't work. Let's go into Smithfield. So we've just turned into Giltspur Street, and as you can see, there's the Viaduct Tavern, and we've just passed the Church of St Sepulchres. Now, I wanted to bring you here before going into Smithfield just to show you this building here, which, as you can see, was a watch house. Now, it was erected, this one, in 1791, destroyed in World War II in 1941, and then rebuilt in 1962. But what was the purpose of a watch house? Well, it does what it says on the tin. It's literally there to house the guards who were watching over the church's graveyard, because at that time in the 18th century there were many grave robbers, body snatchers. So they put guards in watch houses to make sure that the graves weren't robbed. Also, just to the side, there is a bust to the great essayist Charles Lamb. Now, some say he was the greatest essayist in English literature, and he was a blue coat boy here, blue coat boy meaning a school just down the road at Greyfriars. A little further down Giltspur Street, opposite the old St Bartholomew's Hospital, more of that in a moment, we come across this charming statue on the corner of Cock Lane. Now, this is the golden boy of Pye Corner, originally known as the Fat Boy, and he was gilded here on this spot in the 1800s, where they say the Great Fire of London stopped, where it ended. The monument to the Great Fire of London is, of course, by London Bridge, and that's where it started. And the reason this is called Pye Corner, the golden boy of Pye Corner, is believed to be because there was a pub called the Magpie here. So the fire started in Pudding Lane and it ended in Pye Corner. We've reached Smithfield Square now, and before we begin our exploration of London's bloodiest square, let me talk about a famous TV location here. Bit of fun before the gore, guys. And it was from this roof at St Bart's Hospital that Sherlock, played by Benedict Cumberbatch, well, he throws himself off the roof to fake his death at the end of series 2. Now, there used to be a telephone box just underneath, and the wall beside the telephone box became a shrine to Sherlock, as did the telephone box, and it was all covered in Sherlock graffiti, like "Sherlock lives, long live Sherlock, save John Watson." And it's rather a shame that it's gone now, but I think the fans may return once this building work has been completed. So let's move into Smithfield Square itself. So we are in Smithfield Square now, and this is the main entrance to St Bartholomew's Hospital. Now, it was founded in 1123 by Rahare, who was an interesting character at the court of King Henry I, and it has been said that he was a court jester. The story goes that he travelled to Rome and became seriously ill. St Bartholomew appeared in a vision and told him that all would be well, and to build a hospital in his name. Now I know it doesn't look like much at the moment, but I will show you a picture of a statue that's underneath this gateway. Now when Rahare returned to London, and he did as instructed, first building the Priory of St. Bartholomew, which we will see later, and where he is buried, and then founded this hospital. It was refounded by King Henry VIII in 1546, and it's his statue which stands over the entrance of the gateway. Now, as you can see, we can't see the statue at the moment, but I'm going to show you a picture just on the wall here of what it looks like. It's a very impressive entrance once this tarpaulin and scaffolding has been cleared. So here is the statue of King Henry VIII, which lies in the middle of the gateway, and it's the only statue we have of this notorious king in central London. Now St Bart's, to give it its nickname, is the oldest hospital in Britain, which is still providing medical services on the same site since its foundation. And it was here that William Harvey conducted research on the body's circulatory system. Now the main square inside was designed by James Gibbs, who designed the Church of St Martin in the Fields in Trafalgar Square. And this is a little church inside called St Bartholomew the Less. But also inside there is a great hall and a staircase with murals painted by William Hogarth. Now these are not usually open to the public except for open weekend, which usually takes place in September. It's when a lot of public buildings that are usually closed to the public are open just for that weekend. Now you can see on the walls outside St Bartholomew's there's a lot of marks. There's another one there, there's some more here, and there's quite a big one here. Now these marks are actually bomb damage from World War II, and they keep him here as a reminder of the conflict. Now I did say that Smithfield was London's bloodiest square, but I haven't really told you why yet. Well, now is the time. Now one of the first bloody incidents to occur in the square was in 1381, and the end of the Peasants Revolt. Now remember, the revolt was caused by Levian attacks on the people, and it was called the poll tax. And if anyone remembers back to 1990, Margaret Thatcher tried to do something very similar, and there was a kind of a mini revolt then in Trafalgar Square. Now these leaders, this revolt, it was chaotic. It was caused by the levying of tax on people. Wat Tyler was the leader of the revolt, and tens of thousands marched on London, causing mayhem and looting. For example, the Savoy Palace was burnt to the ground. The Archbishop of Canterbury was taken out by the mob and executed. Now eventually the young king, Richard II, and the Lord Mayor of London, William Walworth, met Wat Tyler and the peasants here in Smithfield in June of 1381. Now it was a really hot day, and it is said that Tyler took a glug of wine, a mouthful of wine, swirled it around his mouth to cool himself down, and then he spat it out. The Lord Mayor, William Walworth, took this the wrong way and thought Tyler was insulting the king. He drew his sword and he beheaded him on the spot. Now, not really the wisest thing to do when there are thousands of angry Tyler supporters with weapons poised. However, the king bravely said to them that there would be no more bloodshed, and that he would be their captain and all their demands would be met. So the situation was diffused and they all dispersed. However, a few weeks later, Richard reneged on his promises and the leaders were found and executed. So we move on to probably the bloodiest incident in the square's long history. There have been many of them, but I would put this one down as the bloodiest. Now, there's a clue. There's a Scotland flag. The Scottish knight, William Wallace, was executed here in 1305. He was one of the main leaders of the Scottish War of Independence, but was eventually captured and suffered the bloodiest death known to man. He was hung, drawn, and quartered. Do you want to know the details? Well, you're gonna get them. First, he was taken from the Tower of London, dragged naked through the city at the heels of a horse, then untied and hung until he was nearly dead. Then taken down while he was still alive, and a knife cut open his body. His organs were then drawn out and burnt in front of him. By this time he was dead. He was then beheaded and his body was cut into 4 parts, while his head was dipped in tar and displayed on London Bridge. Now, in 2005, a memorial service was held at the Priory of St Bartholomew's to mark the 700th anniversary of his death. And Wallace, of course, was famously played by Mel Gibson in the Oscar-winning film Braveheart. Now, as you can see, people still leave memorials here, like tartan and thistles. Well, here's the Scottish flag, and I believe this is a thistle. Let's move over to something more modern, but another film reference. So opposite the William Wallace Memorial, we have the Smithfield underground car park. Why is this famous? Well, no apparent reason apart from the fact that it became the new headquarters of MI6 in Skyfall, after the previous headquarters on the Thames at Vauxhall was blown up. Now you can see James Bond in the film driving down here, but the original function of this car park was part of a tunnel system which transferred the animals to the markets, which is over here, where they were then slaughtered. Smithfield was a place of execution for over 400 years. It was originally known though as Smoothfield. Now there's another plaque over here, and this one is another reason why it's a bloody square. Now this plaque is to the Protestant martyrs. Now 300 of them were burnt at the stake on the orders of Queen Mary I, Bloody Mary, as she tried to reconvert the country to Catholicism. Now I heard a story recently that she was particularly cruel in that she demanded that old wood was used, because if the wood was new, victims often died of smoke inhalation, and Mary wanted them to feel the flames, so instructed that old wood had to be used. Actually, next to this monument is a new monument to Wat Tyler and the Peasants Revolt. What I want to show you now, just before we go through to the Priory of the Church of St Bartholomew the Great, is this wonderful gatehouse which leads to the Priory. Now, until 1916, this gem of a gatehouse was obscured by a Georgian gateway, but thank God we discovered what was underneath, and that was mainly thanks to a bomb which was dropped from a German Zeppelin in World War I in 1916, and it tore the Georgian facade down. So let's wander through. It's really quite haunting at night when you come through here. You may recognise it from a film, which I'll talk about in a moment. Saint Bartholomew the Great. Now, as we mentioned earlier, it was founded by the monk Rahare, who is actually buried in an elaborate tomb. His ghost is supposed to haunt the church. And the church is famous for its Romanesque architecture, and is a place I would highly recommend you visit if you are interested in Norman buildings. Now, many people have claimed to have been cured of illness and disease here, especially on the 24th of August, St. Bartholomew's Day. The church was ransacked during the Reformation, and then it fell into disrepair and even ended up as a place for squatters in the 18th century. Now, one famous squatter in the 19th century was the cricketer W.G. Grace, and it was restored in the 19th century under Sir Aston Webb's design. American founding father Benjamin Franklin worked here in a printer's as a typesetter, and on Good Friday, hot cross buns are issued to widows of the parish as stipulated by a lady buried here, and 21 sixpences are then planted on her grave. But it is also a very famous film location. It's been used in Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, Shakespeare in Love, Sherlock Holmes, The End of the Affair, Elizabeth the Golden Age, but most famously, let me come back to the pathway, most famously in the final church in the movie, in the very successful movie, 4 Weddings and a Funeral, the 4th church. And it's here that Hugh Grant races along this path into the church. Just go a little closer. There's Saint Bartholomew himself above the church entrance. I love these quiet lanes. So let me take you to another pub, very historic pub. I haven't spoken about Bartholomew Fair yet. Now, Bartholomew Fair was a fair that would take place on the 24th of August each year, and over the centuries lasted from 3 days to 2 weeks, depending on the era. Now, it was essentially a cloth fair which attracted merchants from all over Europe, but was eventually suppressed in 1855 for debauchery. It's the setting of Ben Jonson's play of the same name, Bartholomew Fair, and also featured in Daniel Defoe's book Moll Flanders. Of course, Daniel Defoe also wrote Robinson Crusoe. So this is the pub I wanted to show you. This is the Hand and Shears, and it also has a nickname, the Fist and Clippers. You can see it says established in 1532, but that's not this building, that was the original pub. The name probably refers to the fact that many disputes that were settled here among clothing merchants who attended Bartholomew's Fair. So the building probably dates from about 1832. It is also said that the shrouds of the dead were sewn together here. This is Long Lane, just adjacent to the alleyways of St Bartholomew's, and another reason why Smithfield can be called London's bloodiest square is due to this magnificent meat market, although animals aren't slaughtered here anymore, of course. It truly is a beautiful Victorian structure and was designed by Horace Jones in the second half of the 19th century. Now, as you can see, it is decorated in rough iron, and there are impressive towers, 4 impressive towers. In fact, you can see 3 of them from here, with a dome displaying stone griffins, the heraldic symbol of the city. The meat market was established in 1860 by an Act of Parliament, and what we would do now is wander through its central avenue. So another view of the square and the James Bond car park. That's not James Bond going by. And I'm going to take you over to the main entrance to Smithfield Market. And this is the central avenue which leads through, as you can see, the market is on either side of this avenue. So let's go through. Now you have to be up very early if you want to catch the market in full swing. Restaurateurs are the main customers, of course, and they order the meat they need for their establishments on that day. And it's very, very noisy in the early hours from 4 AM until midday. Now, some of the workers who finished in the early hours would often go to the surrounding pubs for an early breakfast. Included in that early breakfast would be pints of beer. So they used to have a special license, the pubs around here, to serve pints. So we'll just take a look through these. We've got where to go in. It's finished for the day, but if we just go through here. There's one of the avenues and the other is on the other side with the clock above. So I mentioned the pubs and the fact that the the workers here, the market workers here, could buy a pint outside of licensing hours. But now with drink driving laws and the congestion charge in London, as well as health and safety, this tradition of an early pint with breakfast has ceased. Now there were plans to turn Smithfield into a Covent Garden style trendy area with shops and restaurants, but so far nothing has happened as far as I'm aware. And in 2015 the Museum of London unveiled plans to relocate here to Smithfield. I'm not sure if this is still going ahead. I can't see any building works, but maybe the funding isn't in place yet. So we'll leave the covered market just briefly down here. This has become quite a trendy area actually. If you went this way, you would find, towards Holborn, you would find the popular Fabric nightclub, and over this way, if you went north, there's the wonderfully historic Clerkenwell, and also a chance to see St John's Gate. Beautiful 16th century entrance to the Priory of the Order of the Knights Hospitallers, which is about 5 minutes in this direction. Now we'll save the wonder of Clerkenwell for another live tour, but we're heading in this direction towards Charterhouse. But I want to stop at another pub before going into the square. Welcome to the Fox and Anchor pub. Now this gem of a pub is nestled in between Smithfield, down here, and Charterhouse Square in this direction. It dates from 1898 and is now also a boutique hotel with 6 rooms. However, there's been a tavern here for a lot longer. Just check it out online, guys. It was one of those pubs which opened early for the market workers, as I've just said. Now I love the front with its Art Nouveau tiles, its grinning cats and its grotesques, and it's just as beautiful inside. So ale is sometimes served here in a pewter mug, evocative of earlier times, and there is a collapsible shelf running the length of the wall. Now this harks back to the time when people would often eat their food standing. So if you're interested in historic pubs, guys, take a look at my website, click on the link and purchase an in-depth tour of historic pubs in the Old City, from Blackfriars to Holborn. Let's just go a little closer. Little pub, no vacancy. Leaving the pub, let's move on to the final part of this tour, this walk, and enter Charterhouse Square. So firstly, I'm afraid it's another horror story. When Crossrail, the construction team, were working here, they unearthed a 14th century plague pit. Now I teased you with the mention of a plague pit earlier. Well, now you're going to get all the gory details. And if you want another example of a plague pit, have a look at my St Botolph's Aldgate 1-minute video. Now there was a very large plague pit here, and the victims were those of the Black Death. There were many skeletons found, and they all had black spots, as well as indications of swellings in the groins and armpits. The Black Death killed between 1/3 and 1/2 of the country's population. And these plague pits were dug, this very one on this spot, because there were so many people dying that there was no time to dig individual graves. Now, the men who dug these pits were often very drunk. Well, it's not the greatest job, is it? And when the time came to dispose of the bodies, they weren't always very careful who they threw in. This could be an apocryphal story, but I've heard it from several sources. So those that weren't quite dead were often flung in with other corpses. Now, I told you that was going to be horrific. But there are other stories that that say that everybody that was that died from the Black Death was actually placed in a shroud, so respect was given to all the victims of this horrific illness. Now look at this. In 1370, a Carthusian monastery for monks was founded here. The monks would spend their time praying, so it was a solitary existence, and they would only leave the monastery really once a week for exercise, about 3 hours. The great Thomas More, St. Thomas More, came here for spiritual recuperation. The saintly brothers' existence could have continued indefinitely if it wasn't for our good old friend King Henry VIII and the dissolution of the monasteries from 1536 onwards. Now, monks who refused to convert to Henry's form of Protestantism were tortured and executed in the most grim fashion. Now, some were starved to death in Newgate Prison, which we saw mentioned briefly earlier, where the Old Bailey is located now, while others were hung, drawn and quartered, like William Wallace in Smithfield Square. For example, the prior, later Saint John Houghton, was chopped to pieces and his body parts were hung all over the city like macabre Christmas decorations. Isn't it beautiful? And it's so quiet here. Now, Elizabeth I used the house during preparations for her coronation, and later it became a famous public school before moving to Godalming in Surrey. Now, alumni at the school include the composer Ralph Vaughan Williams, the novelist Robert Graves, the theologian John Wesley, Lord Baden-Powell, the founder of the Scouting movement, and broadcasters Jeremy Paxman and brothers David and Jonathan Dimbleby, plus the singer, songwriter and original band member of Genesis, Peter Gabriel, as well as other Genesis members Tony Banks and Mike Rutherford. Now, it was badly damaged in World War II, but the bombings did reveal the coffin of the founder, Walter Manny, who had been buried in a lead coffin under the high altar. Now, you can visit, and I would say it is definitely worth it. Now, this shows there's a model of how large, how vast Charterhouse was, with the cloisters. So just leaving this beautiful oasis of peace. We're coming towards the end of the tour, but I wanted to show you another TV location. You know, guys, lots of Londoners don't really know Charterhouse Square. It's one of the hidden squares of London. I should include it in my series of squares and piazzas of London. Love these cobblestones. Okay, any detective fans here? Just another entrance, guys, into Charterhouse. It's now the Queen Mary University of London. I think it specializes in medicine training. So I just wanted to show you this before we leave the square and finish the tour. Maybe some of you will recognize it. Now, I mentioned, is anyone a fan of detectives? One of the most famous detectives in the history of literature, not Sherlock Holmes. So this was the TV location of Agatha Christie's Poirot. This is where Poirot lived, in this beautiful Art Deco building. Poirot was of course played by the great David Suchet. So we'll leave Charterhouse, the cobblestones of Charterhouse, the plague pit to our right, and I'll take you to our finishing points. I always like to finish by an underground station, so that you could find your way home if you were actually taking this tour live. And it's literally just at the end of this road. We're going to leave the oldie world of Smithfield and Charterhouse and go back into modern London. In fact, the building in front of us is part of a massive Barbican complex. Now, this area was heavily bombed in the Second World War, and they rebuilt this area as the Barbican. Not very popular when it was built, but I don't know, people are beginning to like it. I like it. Yeah, it's pretty hard on the eyes when you've just seen the wonderful monastery, Carthusian monastery. There you go, there's one of the towers, there's several towers. And the station, sorry there's noise now guys. Station is just over here. So thank you again, and please subscribe to my YouTube channel, please share it. I'm trying to get enough viewers so that I can go live on YouTube as well as on TikTok. Please add me on TikTok at Gary on London, and you'll have the opportunity of seeing me work live, interactive live tours. As you've seen, I've done Covent Garden and I've done Smithfield. Also done live tours of my local town, Enfield, of Middleton House, or Forsey Hall. But like, share and follow guys, and you'll get more of these. I hope you've enjoyed it. I certainly have. And this is Barbican Station. This is where we end the tour. Cheers guys. Take care of each other. Until the next time. Bye bye.